how it fits into the intranet space. What makes some of this so exciting is that we see a lot of interesting changes. We see, first of all, Microsoft Teams being, as Nico was saying, the first product from Microsoft that provides a view of what's sometimes called the sovereign app. It's one app that enables us to be the primary app that we run that can do so much by bringing so many things into one space. We have the ability to do, obviously, all the voice and video and all of that kind of stuff, but the ability to do so much more collaboration-based work from within the Teams interface. So while we can IM and call and voice and video and so on, the use of things like tabs and chatbots and so on mean that we can do a huge amount of things, all from within one application. So as Nico was saying, it's kind of one app that spans all of those capabilities. And another thing that I find really interesting, especially having been in the intranet space and the SharePoint space as part of that for a long time, is that we're seeing from Microsoft in the Viva brand a different focus in terms of what they're aiming to achieve from a kind of a target perspective, if you like. SharePoint was sold as an intranet tool, a content management tool, a document management tool. Skype for Business was sold as a communication tool, things like that. What we're seeing, exactly what Nico was saying, is that Viva isn't aimed at, isn't sold in terms of what it can do. It's sold in terms of its audience. It's an employee experience tool. So that's quite a change from Microsoft, focusing on the audience in their marketing and the tagline rather than purely the product space. So with that, as a kind of an introduction, I guess, to Connections, I'm going to jump in and talk about it a little bit as well. Now, in terms of timelines, Viva is very new. It was only announced, for those who are not aware, it was only announced in February of this year. So it's a very new set of capabilities. Also important to understand is it's not a product in the traditional sense. So if you go and have a look at the list of what you're entitled to in your Office 365, if you're choosing, let's say, an E plan or a B plan or something like that, or so that's on the left from the Microsoft web page. On the right is a common graphic in the community of the different capabilities in the Office and these days Microsoft 365 suite. You won't see Viva listed. You'll see the products like Outlook and Teams and so on. You don't see Viva listed, albeit that it gets a lot of marketing. The reason for that is it's not a standalone product. Skype for Business traditionally was, Teams was, SharePoint is, Exchange, etc., etc. The Viva Connections apps, or Viva Connections, if you like, is a suite of 4 different applications, but they all live inside of Microsoft Teams. You can't simply get, for example, Viva Topics and decide not to use Teams. It's an experience embedded inside of that tool. Now, the focus of what I'm going to talk about is Viva Connections, but also I'm not sure how much knowledge people have of the Viva brand being quite new and so on. So what I would like to do is just give you all a super quick run through of all 4 of the applications that make up the suite. If you're aware of them, that's fine. We won't take too long. If you're not, then this will be hopefully a useful and quick run through. But just to kind of balance that, what I am going to do is hopefully make this the fastest run through of the Viva suite that you've ever seen. So I'm going to spend kind of 1 minute or so on each of the products. We're going to end up on Connections because that's really where we're focusing. So I'm going to start on the right side and move my way to the left. And this is, like I said, a super quick run through of each of the tools. So it's important to know there's a lot more to these tools than what I'm going to give you now. This is really just a high-level overview. If we look at Viva Learning to start off, as we've said, these are apps in Teams. So Viva Learning will surface, for example, as an app in the left menu. If we go in there, you'll see a kind of focused learning. And then what Viva Learning is doing is it's bringing content from alternative content providers, from learning providers into your Teams experience. So there's a handful of them. We see just in the screenshot, Coursera, edX, LinkedIn Learning, there's several others, Skillsoft and so on, several others as well. So if your organization is a customer of one of these learning tools, what it's doing is it's bringing this learning content into Teams. And you can have your own enterprise content here as well, and so on. Importantly, though, this is not every course from LinkedIn Learning, for example. This is curated content that your Learning and Development Manager has sought to surface to you. There'll be some other experiences as well, aside from just the app. There'll be other ways that the content will surface. And if we look at an individual topic, obviously, a title, a picture, but also things like likes and views and so on. So like I said, super quick run through. We're not going to talk more about it. That was Viva Learning. If we jump into Topics, Topics is essentially a knowledge management capability inside of Microsoft Teams. If anybody's familiar with Project Cortex, which is a series of knowledge management capabilities that Microsoft's working on. One of the other things in the Project Cortex suite, for example, is something called SharePoint Syntax, which you may have encountered. Viva Topics is kind of like a sister product, if you like, for surfacing knowledge related items into the Teams experience. As an example here, let's say SOAR. SOAR is some kind of acronym for a project in our company. When somebody posts that acronym as a message, Topics will identify that it is something that's in the knowledge base. It provides a hyperlink the user can hover over, and they get this thing popping up here called the topic card, which provides a super quick version of an overview on the item in the knowledge base. And if the user wants to, they can click View Details, where they'll go to a more detailed view. Once again, Topics is an app in Teams, so you see it again in the full view being represented as an app in the sidebar. And on that particular topic, that SOAR topic, we're seeing here the kind of full view on this particular topic. Again, there's lots more to it. This is just a super quick overview of topics. In terms of insights, the idea with this is that, and as Nico mentioned, it's heavily based on workplace analytics, a capability in Microsoft 365 as well as some other things. The idea here essentially is to assist you in being more productive. So it will help you, for example, up at the top there, you can see a protect time section. Up the top, again, Viva Insights is an app in Teams, same with all the other Viva things, but you see an option, for example, protect time, stay connected, things like that. So it's helping you carve out time in your day to focus on focused work. It also includes, you can see on the right side there, integration with the Headspace app, for example, virtual commute capabilities, etc. So it's helping you be productive, but at the same time sort of manage well-being, make sure that you don't burn out. I like to say the combination of productivity and well-being, I like to kind of call it an effectiveness tool, if you like. It's helping us be more productive, but without being burning out, essentially. And there's tools here as well at the team level and at the org level for managers and all the way up to senior managers, for example, just checking that teams are being effective, but also that they're not likely to lead to burnout. Okay, so those are three of the applications. The last one, really the focus of our session, is Viva Connections. And the idea here, Nico mentioned it a few times, and I think I probably also once or twice earlier on. Essentially, the idea of what we're looking to do with Connections is say people are in Teams, they're living in Teams right now, principally, especially after the pandemic, but it was growing at a rapid rate anyway. It's a tool where people are spending a lot of their time. However, we have an investment in a corporate intranet, a place where we want people to go and be able to find content. We want news to be published, etc. So the idea with Connections is to bring that SharePoint investment into Microsoft Teams. So here's a screenshot from Microsoft. You'll see a mobile app and some other things as well. I'm going to come back to that. It's important that we talk about that. But before we do, what I want to do is show you a running version of actual Viva Connections. By the way, this is one of our apps. I happened to be using it earlier. This is the Quick Links app for sharing links. But as a user, I'm moving around inside of Teams. I can have the other Viva apps installed. When it comes to Connections, though, it surfaces again as an app in Teams, so it appears in that left rail. And in this is purely a demo tenant, so I'm sure you've all heard the Contoso organization. This is Contoso Electronics that I'm pretending to be a member of for this demo. And here we have our corporate intranet. Now this is just a pre-provisioned template. I haven't sort of put anything into here, but just to show you an idea of how that intranet would be surfaced inside of Microsoft Teams. Interesting enough, we've had the ability from the development tools in Teams to be able to do something similar to this for quite some time, to kind of build an app that could do kind of some of this. What makes Viva Connections unique is that, well, a few things. Unlike the other Viva apps, if I go ahead and try and install Viva Insights, for example, I can go to the App Store and I can do a search for it, and I'll get Viva Insights. But when I install it, what I do is I get the Insights app. So if I open that up, for example, you'll see I'm in the Insights app on the left rail. With Connections, one of the things we have the ability to do is to brand it personally for our organization. So for Contoso, for example, I've decided to call it Contoso Net, and I put the Contoso logo on. So unlike the other apps, it's something that we can kind of personalize to our organization. In addition, unlike other apps in Teams, when I go to it the first time, I can access the app. But if I click on the icon a second time, what it does is it provides some additional functionality to access a global navigation that we can have for all users. And this is if you're familiar with the concept, this is something called global navigation in Microsoft 365. So it's a consistent targeted, flexible navigation system that I can provide to all users, both inside of Viva Connections, but everywhere inside of the SharePoint experience, inside of the Microsoft 365 tenancy. So that's another one of the capabilities. Another important thing is that Viva Connections brings integration with search. By default, Teams has a search bar, and if I go ahead and search for some kind of term, by default, I'll jump into that and I'll see Teams search results. What Connections does is it gives me an additional search capability, or an additional search target, if you like. You'll see it actually shows it there in the hover, opens in the SharePoint site. What that's doing is, this is the Connections search, in kind of in inverted commas, if you like. What that's ultimately doing is it's actually pushing the user over to the generalized Microsoft 365 search. Happens to be SharePoint based, but it's the kind of the primary search for your entire Microsoft 365 tenancy. So what Connections is doing, amongst the other things as well, is it's also bringing that search experience more deeply into the actual Teams experience. Okay. Run through of Viva Connections as an application. There's of course more to talk about, and the first thing we'll talk about is just understand the roadmap in terms of the Viva applications. Some of them are fully released. Viva Topics, for example, has been generally available for quite some time. Viva Connections is at different stages of availability, if you want to say it that way. If we take a look at the capability, all of the things that I showed you are running. That is live Viva Connections, but there are some additional capabilities that are still coming later in the year. One of the things that's available is something called dashboards. You can see behind the mobile app, and it appears in the mobile app as well. But this is a kind of a call to action area where we can have activities and things that users can interact with. Uses something called adaptive cards, so it's something you may be using in your organization for other things as well. That's still coming later in the year. And then the actual Viva Connections mobile experience that you're seeing a screenshot or an animation of here as well is still coming. If I look at the Microsoft site earlier on today, what I saw is that they're promising it in summer of 2021. So it's very imminent, but just be aware it's not available right now, but hopefully coming quite soon. The other applications, Viva Insights and Viva Learning and so on, are again at various levels of availability. So depending on which one you're interested, just be aware of what you're looking at and just check their availability. Again, the entire suite was only announced this year, so Microsoft's actually moving ahead of schedule in pretty much all of the applications. Also, just worth being aware of, Viva has different pricing attached to each of the apps. Albeit that it's one brand, each of the apps is a different set of functionality, and likewise is a different pricing model associated with it. As an example, Topics is being a knowledge management engine, is priced at $5 per user per month. So if you want the Viva Topics capabilities, you're looking to pay for that. At the other end of the spectrum, Viva Connections is Microsoft announced is a free capability. So everything that we've seen in that Connections capability is no additional charge in your tenancy. And Insights and Learning and so on, pricing is still to be announced on this. Okay. Those are, certainly some capabilities in terms of overall. One thing to be aware of, though, in terms of Connections, we saw how it's a personalized app. If I look at Insights, as a user, I simply go ahead into Teams. I go down to the App Store, I search for Insights, as you saw, and I can go ahead and open it up and install the app. I've installed it already, so it says open. It traditionally say add if you haven't got it installed. But as a user, I can simply go in the Teams interface and simply take the actions. However, for Connections, and that's the same is true for the other Viva apps as well. For Connections, it's quite different. We saw how we can personalize it with a brand and a logo and a title, etc., which is great. But on the other hand, the other side of that coin, if you like, is that Connections has to be installed by an administrator. I've put a link down in the bottom here to the actual setup guide for Connections. I've also put a link to my blog where I've unpacked some of the details, and I've got a couple of posts around Viva Connections and some alternate ways to install it and so on. But if we bring up the primary installation doc that I showed the link on in the bottom there, this is the details on adding Viva Connections, and you can see there's actually quite a few steps. So it is a very different beast from the other Viva applications. Like I said, essentially an administrator is needing to go ahead and get this installed. If you want to look at kind of the primary steps, if you like, even before installing Viva Connections, at the risk of stating the obvious, recall we've said Viva Connections is essentially bringing your SharePoint site into Teams. As a result, you kind of have to have a SharePoint site to bring in. If you haven't got a SharePoint site, you've got to start there. You've got to actually go and build out a SharePoint intranet kind of capability. Microsoft lists under the prerequisites that it should be a home site, which is a particular kind of SharePoint site. It doesn't have to be, but it's recommended. If you want that global nav capability, though, then you have to have a home site set up in your tenant. Interesting, you don't have to use that home site as the Connections app. In the demo that I showed before, I've done that. I've set this particular site as the home site at the tenant level, and I've enabled global nav. But you could theoretically use another site behind scenes. It just needs to be a SharePoint modern communication site. However, again, just to reiterate the point, you need to have a SharePoint site to show. So if you've got one, that's great. If you don't, you need to think about putting one in place. And Ichicraft, of course, as we'll see later when Nico will demo some of the capabilities, is a great partner to work with to put an awesome intranet together. But you're going to need such a thing in order you're going to need some kind of SharePoint site in order to bring it into Connections. So I'm listing that as a kind of a pre-step, step zero. I'm just summarizing on the slide essentially what it shows in that guide. There's the process of creating that actual application, installing it, and ultimately deploying it and rolling it out to the users. So these steps 1, 2, and 3 are things that the administrator is going to need to do, and they're things that only a Teams admin can do in your organization. So as an end user, you can't sort of create the package and roll it out for everybody. Sorry, one thing I didn't mention, by the way, is you saw that I've installed Viva Insights, for example, that installing that in my own personal capacity will install it into this left rail. One of the things the admin can do, aside from branding and so on, is you can actually pre-install it for all of the users into the left menu and choose where it goes as well. So as an example, as an admin here, I've installed it for all users and I've defaulted it to being on the top left as well. Okay, so that's a quick run through of all of the capability. What I want to leave you with is some ideas around important things to consider and possibly some recommendations if you want to go ahead with Viva Connections. They aren't really related, so I've just kind of grouped them into topics. You'll see that on the bottom of the screen, but really sort of 3 areas that I want to focus on as you think about introducing Viva Connections into your organization. I've mentioned this before, just again to reiterate it, just because it's so important. You need to have a SharePoint site. If you haven't got one, that's going to be your starting point with Connections. However, even if you do have one, what you might want to think about is the current SharePoint site that you have perfect to be embedded into Teams? Are there things we might want to think about a little bit differently? As an example, you may have a great site, but you haven't turned on the global nav features. That might be something you want to turn on. If you have global nav turned on, is the nav in there the kind of stuff that you want to be surfacing to all of your users inside of Teams? As an example, you might want to think about audience targeting things a little bit differently. Essentially, is that nav the exact nav that you want to appear in a Teams plus SharePoint experience? So you might want to give it a little bit of thought there as well. On a related note, we use the concept of personas often in intranet design, trying to sort of map out the different kinds of role players in our organization. We may want to revisit that as we look at Connections, because it might not apply completely the same. For instance, we might want some changes on the personas. We might want other personas altogether. I've got one client where most of the organization is using the SharePoint intranet, but we have a security guard at the front gate who doesn't have any computer access as part of his job. So he was never designed from a persona perspective into the intranet experience. However, now he's been given a Teams account, so he can access Teams on his mobile. He can make calls and things like that, but also get access to news and things that are intended to come down to the wider organization. As a result, he now has access to Connections, and as a result has access to the SharePoint site as well. So he's somebody that we might want to add from a persona perspective as we sort of think about rolling out Viva Connections. Another topic as we move along is the idea of search. I demoed to you how the included in Viva Connections is the Microsoft 365 search experience. Interestingly enough, it is possible to approach that a little bit differently. So on my blog as well, I'll just link you out there. There are 2 topics that I've covered in posts. The one is around using an alternate kind of search as part of Viva Connections, and the other, interestingly enough, is rolling out a different kind of Viva Connections application to different users in your organization. So if we go back to the previous example that we looked at before, I've actually got in the same organization 2 separate users, and I've targeted them differently. So this user also has a Viva Connections app, but as you'll see here, it's a different page. So he's been pointed at a different SharePoint site altogether. And in addition, I've installed a different search experience for him as well. And when I say him, I don't mean at an individual user level. There might be a reason why we want different Viva Connections app. An example that I could think of is, let's say our Office 365 or our Microsoft 365 tenancy is let's say a holding company, and we have completely separate brands inside there, and we don't want them to share, for example, the same SharePoint site. In the site itself, there's a lot of capabilities to target content on and off. So you shouldn't be using something like this to, let's say, have Connections app for an engineer versus a salesperson. This is really where there's a vast difference in the experience that we need to offer. But this is something that's possible using Viva Connections. With regards to search, just to come back to that, what I've done here is I've decided that it can be that I want to be using a different search experience for my organization. In this particular example, what I'm doing is I'm using something called the PNP Modern Search, which is an open source Microsoft-backed capability for a different kind of search experience. So although the Microsoft search experience is tremendous, we can offer some additional functionality in terms of things like this. One of these, for example, is filters. I might want to offer the users the ability to filter by office location or department or different languages, document types, etc. You'll notice document types here is not Word doc or PDF doc, but it's actual kind of business document types. So this is why you might, for instance, have PNP Modern Search running already, and if you want the Viva Connections app to point there, that's possible as well. So just kind of showing that from an advanced scenario perspective. In either case, though, very important, search remains, as it has been for the last 10, 15, 20 years, an unexplored area for a lot of organizations. We see a lot of it with clients that they have Office 365 or Microsoft 365. As a result, the search is working. I still have SharePoint companies that I meet who're still running on-prem. I chatted with one last week whose SharePoint search has been broken for 5 years. So the search functions because Microsoft's responsible for maintaining it, but it may never have been customized for your organization with things like, for example, additional metadata to enable scenarios like additional filtering and of vertical searches like a contract search or an image search, things like that. All of that's capable in the ecosystem. But once again, as with any intranet project, as we look at Viva Connections, it's something that you want to consider in terms of the overall space is possibly looking at your search again and seeing how we can enhance the experience overall. And just one last thing I want to leave you with, and this is really going away from Viva Connections, but looking at a possibly exploring different kinds of alternatives. Essentially, as we've said, Viva Connections is at its core bringing your SharePoint intranet investment into Microsoft Teams. So what I'm trying to show you is Connections is kind of dragging your existing SharePoint experience into Teams. However, at the same time, we see some interesting things in the other Viva apps. Although Microsoft wants you to stay in Teams, they're actually peeling pieces of the intranet off. So things like a learning center may have been something that traditionally was part of a SharePoint intranet, and that's actually been carved out into a separate application in the Viva world. Likewise, topics, for example, you may have a knowledge portal as a subportal inside of your SharePoint. Microsoft's actually pulled that out into a separate application altogether. So one could ask the question, and again, maybe you don't have an investment in SharePoint altogether. Perhaps you want to consider the intranet experience to be something totally different in the team space. As an example, I mentioned up front one of the applications we build, and I really just use this as an example. What the Teammate app is focused on is it's an experience for new employees. So instead of creating a web portal for onboarding new employees, what we do is we have a bot experience inside of Teams where the users can have a kind of a menuing capability in the chatbot directly to browse around content. They can also have an FAQ, a Q&A kind of capability. So instead of putting an FAQ page together on an intranet, for example, you can allow them to ask the questions interactively with an AI-based knowledge base behind the scenes. And then we can also send messages to users over time. So instead of a 1 or 2 do a 3-hour induction meeting with every new employee, for example, we can send them content over days and hours and weeks and kind of let them absorb things over a different kind of time period. And again, the idea here is just saying that the traditional workloads in a web-based content management system, from an intranet perspective, it's also interesting to explore how some of those could be completely reimagined in a Teams-based world. Okay, that's all from me. I'm going to hand back to Nick. I'm going to stay around on the call, of course, if there's any questions or anybody wants to engage. But I'm going to hand back to Nick. Nick, over to you.
Thank you, Hilton. Thank you for that that overview of all the capabilities and the different points at which people can sort of deviate from the recommendations of Microsoft. That's good to know, and especially that sort of view of that you can reimagine what this is going to be inside Teams. I think that is extremely relevant, and in that, as I said before, taking that step back to the personas and sort of analysis of what people do throughout their day, and having a look at how they might experience this. We at Ichicraft actually see a couple of challenges. First, starting from the company side. Microsoft is great, but there's many other applications out there. There's many other sources of information out there. Not everything is on the latest version of everything. So, as a company, you have this challenge of targeting the applications and the information and getting it into the hands of the right people. Hopefully the right audiences, not just one plain vanilla for everybody, but actually something that's a bit customized to the group of users that you have, or groups of users that you have in your organization. So at the same time, companies are looking to integrate these different tools into one place. Now, Teams offers a new capability with Teams apps, and we've seen Teams apps for things like ServiceNow and Workday, but really just adding those apps to the left rail, is that changing that overall experience, or just adding, and is it really integrating, or is it something that sits on the side? At the same time, users like to change things to how they work, and if you need to allow that as a company, the investment is quite high to sort of deviate from the standard. The standard is plain vanilla, and what you see is what you get, and the same actually appears also in Teams. You sort of have to adopt people onto that technology, and cannot really allow people to adapt that technology to how they work. And the big challenge out there is that you buy the Microsoft 365 license. Do you then have that single interface? Is that single interface portal.office.com, or still that SharePoint that would try to push the homepage? Is it Teams? But Teams is actually a combination of many different capabilities if you turn them on there. So, one of the challenges that we see, especially in terms of productivity, is that people out there, you, me, everybody, 86% of us is what's called constant checkers. So, if we don't know what's going on in the inbox, or maybe on LinkedIn, or in update of a report, or maybe something in the Teams chat, we do tend to check those things, even if there's nothing there, because they're not brought to one place, and that increases our stress levels a bit. And I've been in the SharePoint business for a long time, for 15 years also. So we've seen a lot of push of making the intranet the place where people get all of their updates and they go to throughout the day. Sadly enough, research shows that it's just one of many places to visit, and people don't really interact on a daily basis that much with the internet. They more see it as something that they catch up on news, more on a weekly basis, or find that one particular link because they know it's offered there. So if you take that from the employee perspective, because that's what we're mostly talking about, they need many different apps to get the full picture. Even with the experience platform being there and the Viva apps, you still need to go past all of these applications. They tend to look different and behave different as to what you can do there. So that's where we see all of that investment in user adoption and having users adopt to the technology. Another problem that we come across a lot, and that I experience myself, is I often need to think where to look for something. Where was that message? Was it in a chat? Was it still in email? Did I get it on my mobile, on like WhatsApp? I mean, it's the same thing for files. A lot of capabilities have been added over time, but people now have, in reality, files on shared drives. They have them in their OneDrive, maybe share it with them through OneDrive. They have them in their Teams, sitting in files there. And as a user, the experience is You often have to first think and then look if you can find it there and then move somewhere else. And all of these experiences are impossible to adapt to how you work. So as knowledge workers, generally, we switch apps 6 to 10 times per hour. And in that, one of the biggest issues is context switching. So we lose a minute here, 2 minutes there, 30 seconds here, looking for where we need to look, then getting into that program, finding what we need to find. You can find it through search or some other ways. And that just, we lose a lot of time in doing that. And that's exactly where Ichicraft looks to solve the challenge by offering something that's unified, personal, relevant to the user, but also actionable in the place where they work. So that takes me to the Ichicraft boards, and let me show a very quick demo of that. Here we have such a board for Jago in this case, and we're looking at it in Teams, and we have, as Hilton explained to us, also set up Viva Connections here. So we have that global navigation and the things that you see that Microsoft brings in, as well as bringing in some of the navigation from a SharePoint site. Now, again, this can be any site collection. So that thinking of one site collection being the main one for all also doesn't really apply here. You can bring in any site collection under any app, and the app can be brought in under any policy to target your users. And that's actually what the board down here does as well, very well. We can target the information as a whole, the board to an audience. We can target the widgets that you see here, but also the contents. And if you check out some of these widgets, we have some news here being brought in from SharePoint in this case. And as usual, you just stay in context of this application. So you don't have to leave Teams to look at the news and interact with the news. And once you're done, you go out and that's it. And you can catch up on all the news. Now, this in itself is being pushed. This widget cannot be moved by the user. The user can actually go in and move some of these other widgets around, but I'll do a bit more of that in a second. What a user can do is he can go into the settings and then find different sites that can be followed throughout the organization. Basically, let's see if any of the sites come up at the moment. Not sure why they're not, but they can add sites and they can add content and remove content as they go. And that actually applies to all of the experiences here. So if you need to launch different applications, you get an overview of different apps. You can throw a few out you're liking. You can move them around if need be in a different position, but you can also add other apps that have been targeted to you to this overview and start changing that overview. So all of the experience here can be modeled to your needs. And basically what you do is you reduce the need to go to all of these different applications. Actually, as a user, you don't need to know where this information resides. The information is simply brought to you. So if we go to the sort of middle section, what you see is, traditionally it would be in our Outlook, but here we brought in some widgets to show your inbox. And inside those widgets, they're quite actionable. So you can see what's in the message. You can flag them for follow-up later. You can archive them. Now you can go through and take those actions immediately without leaving this experience. Same goes, of course, for your tasks. Bring together to do and planner in one and the same place. You can tick off those tasks, but in your flow of work, you can also add some things that come up at this moment so that you need to so that you can actually update those things immediately. And as you see, what this actually does is it's not a separate intranet as such. It plugs into the Microsoft ecosystem, and you get these messages actually coming from that ecosystem. And as you update things, things change live across this board, but also across the backend system. So in actually your Microsoft To Do, where these things are also being serviced, these things change real time. Well, same goes for meetings, how much time between meetings, you can see that quickly. But why not jump into the Teams meeting right from here? Or taking some of the attachments that are behind and jumping in one of those attachments. All of that is possible through the board. And as users go through, they can start also adding additional boards if they need additional real estate, screen real estate, maybe create a reporting board. But on the boards themselves, they can also go through and add different widgets, so they get a catalog of different widgets to work with. I see I lost connection with this tenant. Let me just quickly reload to see what's going on here. So as I said, we can add different widgets on the board, and one of those things, and that's also made possible by by Viva Connections is that besides those apps that I showed you before, you can actually start adding some Teams apps there as well. And that's very relevant, of course, because as we bring in different apps into this experience in Microsoft Teams, this left rail is actually only has limited space. So as users, you would have to go through and find and maybe pin, but there's only a limited number of apps that you can pin. So one thing I want to show you through the Viva Connections app, we can actually deep link to Teams apps. So again, you can do that audience targeting and get people the right apps that they are entitled to or use. But then you can sort of deep link into those apps. So as I am in this experience, and you don't have to really leave this experience to either do this or any of the collaboration, I can quickly get into those Teams apps. And you can see DocuSign here on the left. Teams Help is actually out of view. But if I want to go into Teams Help, I can just go in and open that up and have that experience here being assisted on Microsoft Teams. So that was a really quick rundown, and I see that we're out of time. Here are some of my contact details. Actually, if you want to get that board into your environment, we have an unrestricted trial that just simply shows a banner at the top, so you can use that with as many users as you want. It just goes out and puts up that banner. But I also would like to thank our main speaker here, Hilton Giesenau, where you can find all of his contact details across here. And please reach out to him, if you want to know more about how to implement most of that Viva stack that he's gone across, because he has a lot of experience in rolling these kind of technologies out. Maybe to you, Hilton, to say goodbye to all of the participants as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Nico. So, first of all, thank you to you, Ichicraft. Thanks for having me on. It was great to present. I hope everybody found it worthwhile. Thank you to the audience for joining, and I hope you found it a worthwhile section. Please do feel free to go ahead and contact me. I'm aside from kind of doing this day to day, also very passionate about this stuff. So more than happy to get in touch and carry on some conversations. Some people on the call have already connected with me on LinkedIn, so more than happy to connect there as well. But yeah, thank you, and thanks to the audience.
Fantastic. Have a great day, everybody.